Good morning. Well, y'all look good today. 2 weeks ago, the McCarts came up here and told you about some things that Good Samaritan was doing in Honduras and ways that you could be praying for their ministry. And then last week, the Jordans came up here and told you what it was like for them to go down there for their first mission trip. Today, we get the privilege of talking to you about the children. And I say privilege because you're the First Baptist Church of Loganville. Your generosity is famous. Jimmy Wilson stood up here 2 weeks ago and said, you sponsor more children in Honduras than any other church in the nation. Think about that. It's like you're just sitting out there waiting for an opportunity to meet a need. So we're not here to ask you for any money. We're really not even here to ask you to sponsor kids. We just want to make you aware of some opportunities to meet some needs and touch lives for Jesus through the Opportunity of a Lifetime program at Good Samaritan. First time I went to Honduras was in 2007. And I got to tell you, the skies didn't part. God didn't thunder down from heaven and tell me to go to Honduras. So if that's what some of y'all are waiting on to take a week off and go on a mission trip, that doesn't have to happen. I just want to go see what all the fuss was about. I figured if I went down there and served in a mission ministry for a week and God hadn't specifically sent me, He wasn't going to be mad. So I just went. We got down there and we got on this bus at the airport and we didn't get off it for a week. We rode all over Honduras and Nicaragua. When I went the first time was in November, and that was a rainy season. We got it stuck in the mud in the middle of the road. Had to walk out. Here's Tony carrying Stephanie Tyson on his back through the mud. Had to wade across a creek flowing across the middle of the road. But I got the opportunity to see a beautiful country. And I learned a lot about the Good Samaritan and their mission and their ministry and the things that they were doing down there. I saw some amazing things.
Well, Jim came home and he was telling me about all the things he got to see, the churches he visited. He told me about the feeding kitchens and about all the good things Good Samaritan was doing down there. Then he told me about all the children. He told me about, showed me some pictures, and then he got to the point where he told me about how only the sponsored children got to eat. And then, to be honest, it became very overwhelming.
You know, sometimes there's just so much need, it can be overwhelming, can't it? So we figured today, rather than just barrage you with tons of pictures of a bunch of different kids and tell you how much they needed your help, we're going to introduce you to just one little girl. And I need to warn you right up front, as soon as you see her, you're going to fall in love with her. But she has already been sponsored by us. So let me introduce you to Diana Giselle Gomez Vargas. We picked her out of a stack of pictures and info sheets and sponsored her right after my first trip. And she had just turned 6 years old, and so that meant from that point on, she got to eat every day. Well, let me clarify that. She got one nutritious meal every day during the week.
I first met Diana in 2009 when I went in my first time. And I got to spend 5 days with her because we was in Coyote for 5 days. And when the bus would come pulling up, she would come running. She would scan the North Americans looking for us. And when she'd see us, she'd light up and she'd come running. She was just really precious. There she is again. Get another picture.
This picture was actually taken on Eddie's front porch right after she'd listened to the VBS story and accepted Jesus as her Savior.
Right.
And this week, I didn't get to spend a lot of time with them because we were building a feeding kitchen. And so most of my time I spent working on the feeding kitchen. But anytime I would slow down and take a break or eat lunch, she was right next to me. And she was so grateful that I was her sponsor that she just wanted to be near me. And I spent so little time with them that week that I was determined when I went back in 2011 that I was going to get to know her and her family a lot better. So I met her mom. Her name's Deanna too. Her grandma Berta, and that's her little sister Santos. Now, the year before this picture was taken, her dad died from alcoholism. So you can just imagine what her life had been like up until that point. But I was able to go to her house and see how she lived and where she lived. Now, that whole house is not hers. Her grandparents live in the back of the house. Her and her family just live in the little park right up front. And there's basically just one room, and it wasn't even big enough for us all to get in there. Her grandparents leaned in through the window. And behind that curtain is their bedroom, and it's just big enough for 2 twin beds, and their whole family sleeps in there. When I went back in 2013, she had grown up so much. And I got to take her for ice cream in San Marcos de Colón. I got to spend a lot of time with her in Katy. We had a great week. Now, I got to tell you, up until this point, I had been a very, let's call it passive sponsor. I'd gotten all of her letters, and I'd never written her back one time. I wasn't praying for her faithfully like her letters say she was praying for me. I'd never bought her a Christmas present. And I just had her support automatically deducted every month. But you know, if that's all I had ever done, her life would have been changed because of this program, because of the food and the clothing and the education and the teachings about Jesus that she got from being sponsored. I was the one missing the blessing. But I got an email May of last year from Good Samaritan that changed all that. They told me that Deanna was a bad student and didn't want to study and should be dropped from the program. I didn't know what to do. So I didn't do anything. Up until that point, she had been a great student and loved school. And I figured I'd give her to the end of the school year that ended in November and see if she didn't come back around. And because February of this year, she'd be starting at the Good Samaritan school and living in the dorm. Well, February of this year, I got her grades from last year, and they weren't good. But worse than that, I found out she hadn't gone to live at the Good Samaritan school. She was in some bogus home study program where she only got in front of a teacher 2 mornings a month. So I wrote her a long letter. And I told her, they call this the Opportunity of a Lifetime program because it may very well be the only opportunity she'll get in her entire lifetime. And I tried to explain to her what this program would do for her, but ultimately it was her decision. If she wasn't willing to study and work hard, there were a lot of other kids that wanted this opportunity. Well, she wrote me a letter back and said she wanted to stay in the program and that she'd had a problem understanding some stuff and with a teacher, and that she promised that she would study and work hard and she'd have her grades all the way back up by the time we got there in June.
So when we got there, she had real sadness about her. She wouldn't look at us. She wouldn't look us in the eye. So we asked Stephanie Tyson to take her aside and talk to her and see what the problem was. She said that she didn't want to leave home. She didn't want to go to the dorms, that she would just rather spend 3 years at a home study program, which you know what that's all about, and then go to the public high school in another village, the village next to her.
When I heard that, we had 2 daughters graduate over here, and I'm thinking, they got mean girls in Honduras? Why didn't she want to go to Honduras? To high school. And we knew there was more to it than that. So the next morning, we took Stephanie with us, and we went back to her house. And we were able to have a great conversation with her and her mom and her grandmom, and we found out what was causing all the problems. As soon as we got there, Deanna was so ashamed of being so poor that she wouldn't even come in and sit down with us until we made her. They couldn't sleep in their bedroom anymore because the wall was caving in and they're afraid it was going to fall on them in the middle of the night. So we were able to sit there and talk to her and try to help her understand that with the education and the opportunities of this program, she could do more to help her family and herself than she ever could without it. Her grandma was sitting in there, and she said she had 6 kids. Only one of them had an education. He was doing great. The rest of them were poor and didn't know anything. And then in a moment of just humble honesty, her mom told us what the problem was. She said, I haven't been encouraging her to go because I don't have any money, and I can't afford to send her. We started explaining to them that it was all part of the program, that everything was covered, and her little girl could get an education and a hope for the future without any cost to her. You should have seen her light up. It was like you could see the oppression lift off of them. She wouldn't have to live in a house where they had pots stacked up in the rafters and to catch the rainwater. She could actually see a different future. And Deanna's whole countenance started to change. This is our Deanna the day we left. Totally new girl. Now, Tammy will be the first one to tell you, I am so left brain my head tilts. I am always analyzing and calculating, and before I ever went down there the first time, I had this whole thing figured out. I just needed some confirmation. So about the second or third day I got down there and I got on that bus, I sat up next to Sister Joan. It was actually the day we got stuck in the mud on the way to Katy. And as soon as I got an opportunity, I leaned over and I said, what you're doing down here is great. But really, wouldn't it be better if I just sent you the money rather than spending the time to come down here or spending the money to come down here? And she smiled at me, and it was more like a smirk. It's kind of like, when a little kid says something that's so naive and immature, it's just adorable, and you want to laugh at them, but you don't want to hurt their feelings. It was one of those kind of smiles. And I said, should I send the money or just come myself? And she leaned over and she smiled and she said, oh, no, dear, then you wouldn't have the burden. I didn't really understand what she meant by that then. I understand it now. These are the kids we sponsor in Honduras. There's Yancey, Anderson, Luis, Kimberlyn. Now, the day before this picture was taken, here's a picture of Kimberlyn sitting on Eddie's same front porch listening to another VBS story, and here's her standing up accepting Jesus as her Savior with another girl. Then, of course, Deanna. But there's another aspect of this that we really hadn't counted on. Back in 2009, we took our 2 youngest kids right after they graduated high school with us down there. Now, I know these are our kids, but you got to admit, they look pretty good, don't they? I mean, Timothy's got his Titleist ball cap on and the brim's rolled just so. And it's sitting at just the perfect angle because if he comes down too far, he looks like Dad. And if he goes back too far, he looks like Gomer. He's got his Under Armour collared shirt on and his JanSport backpack. And Bailey just looks beautiful in her white Abercrombie blouse. Her hair's done just right. And her nails are done. Let me tell y'all something. You ain't never had no fun till you've taken 2 yuppie, preppy, way cool teenagers into the remote hills of Honduras and dressed them up for Spanish VBS. Obviously, they were feeling a little dorky. So, being the compassionate parents that we are, there was only one thing we could do. We just surrounded them with dorks. They ended up getting into it, and they had a good time. In fact, we had a great week. But here's the thing we weren't counting on. There's Bailey, and there's Yancey. That's Yancey's mom, Carmen, and Yancey's little sister, Kayla. She was born about a month after we left. Bailey now sponsors Yancey's little sister, Kayla. And there's Timothy and Deanna. Well, Timothy and his wife, Lauren, now sponsor Deanna's little sister, Santos. Isn't that cool? Let's be honest. You or I are probably not going to be the ones that solve the world's problems. But there's something every single one of us can do to touch at least one other life for Jesus. Now, it may be somebody at work that just is going through some stuff and needs somebody to take 5 minutes out of their life to just listen to them and maybe offer to pray with them. It may be finding a kid at school that doesn't have any friends and sitting with them in the cafeteria at lunch. It may be sponsoring one of these kids. If this is something you think you want to do, it's $30 a month, very efficient operation, only 10% of it goes to overhead. They spend $10 a month feeding the kid, that's one nutritious meal a day during the week, and 17 of it goes to school supplies, and that's uniforms, shoes, books, paper, pens, things like that. So if this is something that you think you might be interested in, after the service, Tammy and I will be out in the foyer, and we would love to try to answer your questions. Thank y'all for listening to us.